Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, February 3rd, day 486 of the war. Amanda Borshel Dan here with our Zman Yisrael editor, Biranit Goren. Hi, Bira. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda. It's good to be here.
The pleasure is mine. We are going to concentrate on information we're learning from the returned hostages about their captivities. We'll hear what we now know about the treatment meted out to the three men who were released on Saturday, Yarden Bibas, Keith Siegel, and Ofer Calderon. And we'll hear chilling accounts from Amit Soussana, who was freed in November 2023 after 55 days of captivity. But first, we'll learn about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's upcoming meetings in Washington, D.C. today and tomorrow, especially with US Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff. All this and much, much more when we're back. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Washington, D.C. yesterday and is set to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump tomorrow. In the meantime, he's meant to meet and potentially start up talks about the second phase of the hostage release deal with U.S. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff. Now, Witkoff was just in Israel. He entered Gaza, he met with hostage families and released soldiers. And Bira, what can you tell us about Steve Witkoff?
Well, I don't know much about him, I have to admit. He's almost, he came out of nowhere as far as we're concerned. You know, as far as Israel is concerned, we've never heard of him before. He wasn't, as far as we know, involved in politics and in regional politics specifically beforehand. He's not somebody who has ties, you know, with the Arab countries or with Israel in any way. And he was appointed special envoy to the Middle East by Trump during the interim administration. And he immediately went to work. He doesn't need to go through, because he's an envoy, so he doesn't need to go through Congress hearing, etc. So he started working the day that Trump named him, which was late November, about over a month ago. He immediately flew to Qatar, you know, he flew to Egypt, started talking in. At some point, he arrived unannounced or, you know, without any pre-plans in Israel on a Saturday, met with Netanyahu, and lo and behold, a couple of days later, the agreement with Hamas was announced. So you have to be in awe. That person looks like he knows how to do business, you know, and he seems to have a very strong point of view. But I think what completely took over, we were in awe of him in Israel, I think, because of actually the humane side of how he gets things done. You mentioned he visited Gaza. No other American has done that. Blinken was never in Gaza. You know, Lloyd Austin was never in Gaza. The entire Biden administration, they never visited Gaza. And on his own volition, Steve Witkoff decided to go see with his own eyes what is happening in Gaza. It's quite, you know, it's such a simple thing to do. And you're saying, okay, that guy means business and he wants to know firsthand what he's dealing with. And then the next surprise we had was on Thursday, in the previous release, when Rebel Yehud was released, among others, he actually spent the morning at the hostage square in Tel Aviv with the hostages' families and their supporters, watching on the big screen that release, like taking in the Israeli experience, if you will, of how it feels to see them get released. He spoke to the hostages' families and was very, was very open to anyone talking to him. It was really surprising because I'm not denigrating in any way, shape, or form any work and really hard work that any American has ever done for the release of our hostages and the Biden administration. But this is a brand new approach. We've not seen it from any other country, from France or England for that matter, that their envoy would be so hands-on and so boots on the ground, if you will. And then, of course, it became very clear that he's much more involved. I mean, he visited the observation soldiers, the five released female soldiers. He visited them and their families in the hospital and talked to them. Everything about it is just, it's so confounding to us because our own leaders don't do it. I don't know that Netanyahu has yet to visit the hostage square, certainly not that the families and the released soldiers he's not met, certainly. So it's very weird, and weird in a good way. And we're very much in awe of him because he gets things done. Now, Netanyahu is meeting with him today, and today's also the 16th day of the hostage release deal. And this is the day that, according to the agreement, is when the talks about the second phase begins. So it's a crucial day. And the fact that it begins with Witkoff meeting Netanyahu in Washington a day before Netanyahu meets Trump is quite telling on how important his role is in this situation. And I think right now he's probably the leader, if you will, or politician or diplomat, the number one diplomat in the world to actually be an expert on the topic of the Israeli hostage release, because he's seen it and he's talked about it and he's met with every single proponent of this agreement. I mean, from Gazans, Palestinian Gazans, to freed hostages, certainly Netanyahu, etc. So he's almost like a key factor, and he has the X factor in I think solving this. We have quite a lot of faith in him.
So in terms of also having out-of-the-box ideas, of course, U.S. President Donald Trump has floated the idea repeatedly of removing the Gazans from the Gaza Strip and taking them into Jordan, into Egypt. I think potentially even Indonesia was floated at one point as well. And you have to think, is this a direct reflection of what he's hearing from Witkoff's eyewitness accounts of the devastation in Gaza, that there is this understanding that the whole strip needs to be razed and rebuilt?
Look, we have to look at this, take a step back and look at it objectively. When you look at photos and visuals from the Gaza Strip, and I'm sure Witkoff has seen it with his own eyes, the devastation there, it is going to take years, if not decades, to rebuild. It becomes all the more very complex to do when there are 2 million uprooted citizens there or Palestinians there. So, if you just had a strip of land that is empty or void of people, it probably would have been a lot easier to just straighten the whole thing up and then rebuild or build whatever you like it, like start from scratch, almost like the big fire of New York City, in the 1900 or whatever it was. So I guess this is just me talking. I don't know, but I'm guessing Trump sees this as the easiest solution. All right, this is what you need to do. Then just get the people out. There's so many Muslim countries around the world. They'll just take them in, even if it's temporary, even if it's for 10 years or whatever. Just get out of the way, put them somewhere else, and then we'll rebuild. It's almost in a way, it's almost akin to saying, okay, we have to uproot or we have to move our citizens, so let's move them to a hotel. So for him, Jordan, Indonesia, whatever, is a hotel for a long stay, or an Airbnb for Gazan Palestinians. But the reality of it is that you may be able to get a few tens of thousands to emigrate because they'll want to emigrate, because they'll think that they have a better future somewhere else. But even then, it's not going to be the Jordan that has its own huge problem of refugees, and where Palestinians are actually the majority, and they live in refugee camps. That there are still refugee camps in Jordan, not to mention the number of refugees they've taken from Syria over the years. This is not going to be an improvement of their life. So they're not going to want to move there, and the Jordanians don't want them because it'll cause an upheaval. It'll literally bring down, or there's a good chance it'll bring down the Hashemite kingdomship, So likewise in Egypt, Egypt has been one of the poorest countries recently in the region. They have a big economic issue. So for them, they don't want a few hundred thousands or even tens of thousands of Palestinians, not to mention that they're Shiites who are part of the Muslim Brothers, who really threatens the stability of the Egyptian government. So I think Trump, in a way, I don't want to say he's naive. He's not naive, but there's almost like a childish worldview on his part that sometimes actually works. He sees things in such a binary way. And it's like, what's the problem? Just move this here and move it there. And you're like, no. But in reality, sometimes it works. I don't see this approach ever coming to fruition in the fullest way. If he gets a few tens of thousands of Gazans moving to Canada, Indonesia, wherever it will be, it's not going to be the solution anyway. So it's not really what he's talking about. And so I don't see that coming to fruition. I don't think it's a realistic thought. But good on him for thinking outside of the box.
And on the other hand, the Jordanian king is set to visit Washington in the near future. We'll go to a short break. And we're back. Let's turn to the three men freed on Saturday and what we are now learning of their treatment in captivity. Let's start with released hostage Yarden Bibas, who was reportedly taunted by his Hamas captors about the fate of his wife and children, Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir, during the nearly 16 months in captivity. Bira, what else are you hearing about Yarden Bibas's captivity so far?
Well, we know that he stayed when he was captured, he was obviously injured. He didn't get any medical treatment. They didn't attend to his wounds. I mean, we saw that he was bleeding when he was captured. He was put along with Ofer Calderon, who also was released on Saturday. They were put together in a cage in an underground tunnel. They were held in cages there for quite a while. And the other hostages who were held in that cage actually petitioned for them to get freed from the cage. And it took a while, but they were for quite a couple of weeks or so, they were held in a cage, which was completely dark in an underground tunnel that is devoid of air, that is full of humidity. So that to begin with was very hard. They weren't really fed. And then they got separated. As far as we know, we don't know a lot yet, but as far as we know, Yarden, after the release of the hostages in November 2003, Yarden was alone for quite a while. And indeed, in November, they told him, we've seen that video. It was one of the most horrendous videos the Hamas released, where they tell him that his wife Shiri and his two kids, Kfir and Ariel, who were at that point 10 months old and 4 years old, that they were killed in an Israeli bombing. That's what the Hamas told Yarden, and immediately shot. His reaction, he was crying like a wolf. And so apparently they continued doing that. Afterwards, they kept telling him about what happened to Shiri and the kids, what they look like. And it's just really a psychological warfare. He was starved. He was devoid of sunlight. He was, as far as we know, quite alone for the vast majority of the time he was there. We don't know a lot yet. I think probably stories will come out. The vast majority of the stories that came out aren't actually from him, but from people who either crossed paths with him or a family member who's letting on a point or two. I think we can all imagine what he's going through. That's as much as we can do. He's probably, from a psychological point of view, is going to be one of the hardest released hostages cases, if you will, for us to deal with. I know that there's a lot of curiosity, obviously, but that's as much as we know about him.
Let's turn to Ofer Calderon, who is a dual French-Israeli national, and he was apparently treated by his captors like an IDF reserve soldier. He's not the only one in this category. We'll also speak about another case in a bit. But this was really evident in Ofer's clothing at the release. I turned to my husband when I saw what he was wearing, and I said, wow, this looks a lot like the tactical uniform that one of our sons wears as a soldier in the IDF. And obviously, Ofer was not a reserve soldier, but what else do we know about his treatment in Gaza?
Well, it should be pointed out, Ofer is 53 or 54 years old. So the age before this war, but the age of ending your reserve service is 49. So he may have been a reserve soldier well before this war, but he's certainly not. I mean, age-wise, he's certainly not now. So it's a bit weird. It's very, very weird why Hamas thought that. But anyway, again, the one thing that the story comes up with again and again and again from all freed hostages are three things. One is starvation, that they were hardly fed. There were days that they weren't being fed at all, or they were only given like a half a pita a day or something like this to eat. That is the one thing. The second thing is that they all suffered from a lack of sunlight, and darkness was an issue there, that they were held at times, sometimes at long times, in very dark areas without any sunlight, or even sometimes, deliberately kept in the dark without any unnatural light, without any lighting in fixtures or anything. So darkness was a big issue. And the third one is the psychological warfare that their captors, and especially when they had bouts of being alone. If they were with other hostages, it made it easier. The togetherness, it comes off from all stories. When they were in groups, when they were with other hostages, it made it a lot easier. When they were alone, they were much more exposed to psychological warfare, to sometimes physical abuse as well. So that is in line with that. The third person to be released on Saturday was Keith Siegel, and he was most visibly, when we saw him, he was most visibly weak and very pale. Now, Keith actually, you would think when you saw him, God, that person, that was the first thought I had. He must have been in an underground tunnel for that entire time. But actually, no, he was in apartments in Gaza City. They kept moving him between apartments. However, they kept him in back rooms without any light and without any windows open or anything, so that if somebody comes in, they won't see him. So in a sense, it was almost in a tunnel environment, but overground. And he was alone. Keith is not, he's 64 years old, so he's not an old man, or he's not an elderly, but he had his own health issues. And also dietary issues. He had to eat meat because that was the only thing they would give him. As soon as they found out he doesn't want to eat meat, that would be the only thing that they would give him. In fact, they would starve him, in fact, to the point where both him and Ofer Calderon did not get any food at all for the 24 hours before they were released. So actually, when Keith came to the IDF, he was starving. It was the first thing he said, and Ofer Calderon, just as an anecdote, said, they asked him, what would you like to eat? And he said, I really want a beer. And the doctors convinced him that because of his status, maybe you should wait with the alcohol a little bit. But it's funny to think that of all the things you could, I try to think, what would I want to be the first thing I eat? There used to be this game of what would be your last supper. So now I'm thinking, okay, what would be my first supper? Beer wouldn't have crossed my mind, but that's what he was thinking about.
Yeah, and in fact, we have Holocaust survivor friends, and they said that in the camps, they would talk about the meal that they would want after they got out, and I couldn't help but think of that after hearing Ofer's beer story. Let's turn now to a woman who was released in November 2023, and she gave a full-on hour-long testimony last week in a program aired on Israel's Uvda investigative program. And I'm talking about released hostage Amit Soussana, and she said actually that she owes her life to one of the recently released female surveillance soldiers, Liri Albag. So, Bira, our time is short, but tell us about Susana's very important interview last week.
Well, Amit already was interviewed by the New York Times last year, if you remember. She was very brave in exposing that she was sexually assaulted while she was during her 55 days as a hostage of the Hamas. So she actually initiated this interview that was aired on Thursday. And she said she felt it was part of her own recuperation process to just get it all out, to just say, and this was the first time we heard a full, complete account, almost a day-to-day, blow-by-blow account of what it was to be a hostage in the Hamas. It is full of horrific stories, and I won't delve into them. If you have the chance, please find this interview and watch it, because it really is the most telling interviews. But her point about Liri Albag really struck a chord. Because it relates to what you said about Ofer Calderon. Her captors, which, by the way, one of them, his daughter was treated for cancer in Hadassah in Jerusalem. Okay, so that didn't make him any nicer to us, even though he was talking about how the doctors are amazing and how they saved his daughter's life. He was actually a complete sadist, and he put her up as a rotisserie chicken, with her hands tied and a stick, like she's about to be cooked or something. So and with a large wooden stick, hit her all over the place. Her eye socket was broken. She was bleeding, and she didn't understand what they want from her. Like, they keep telling her, tell the truth, and she didn't know what they want from her. And only later did she realize they think she's an army officer. She's 40 years old. They think she's an army officer. They kept telling her, we saw you on television. She's not in the army. She didn't even do reserve service or anything like this. She's a lawyer. And they kept hitting her. And at some point, they threw her into the room where Liri Albag and Gamberger, the two soldiers, they stayed with her. And they wouldn't allow them to look at her, and they threw her on the floor and put a gun to her head, and they told her, you have 40 minutes to confess or we kill you. And then Liri, the little girl, 19-year-old Liri, got up, told her, I don't think they're going to kill you, but in case they do, what do you want us to tell your parents? And, Amit said, tell them I love them, etc. And then Liri went out and confronted those captors, those sadistic terrorists, and told them she has nothing to do with the army. She's not a soldier, and convinced them she has nothing, that they made a mistake, and saved her life. I mean, Amit said, she told her, I have no idea if they were going to kill me or not, but you saved my life. So everything about Liri and about Amit's bravery in telling the whole story, everything about those people, when they come out, it's just astounding. It's more than just being emotional about seeing them back home. It's understanding just what bravery means and what the sense of, that survival mode, and how you are able to withstand those horrific things that we think, it's the first instinct any person would have is, I wouldn't be able to live in those conditions. I would die. I would kill myself. No, they don't. They come out after 484 days, and the first thing they say, Liri Albag is number one. It's amazing.
Bira, thank you so much for sharing everything you shared today.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please join us for another episode tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.